This giant thing right on my face. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back, Commissioner Lewis. Welcome back, our fellow commissioners who are joining us virtually tonight. Welcome back, staff, and welcome back, public. It is good to be here. It has been 28 long months since the last time we were all here. So it is good to be back, and we are looking forward to this evening's meeting. So first, I would like to call the July 28th Planning Policy Commission meeting to order, and it is 6:32. As a reminder, we do still have a remote aspect to our meetings. In fact, 2 of our commissioners are joining us virtually. This means staff, PPC members, and members of the public may be participating in the meeting remotely via WebEx. For all who would like to speak during public comments, speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. And if you are attending virtually, by computer or by phone, and would like to speak during public comments, in addition to the above, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device, such as a smartphone or tablet. Or you can use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. Stephen, would you please take attendance?
Commissioner Monahan.
Here.
Commissioner Bader.
Here.
Commissioner Lewis.
Present.
Chair Voice.
Here.
And then Commissioner Milligan is excused for tonight.
And we do have a quorum.
Yes.
Excellent. So tonight we have no minutes to approve. So the first item of our business is public comment. The guidelines for public comments are, first of all, we take them very seriously. They help our decision making. But for the members of the public who are joining us, welcome. And if there is anyone in the meeting who would like to do this and make public comments, please raise your virtual hand. To do this, if you are on the phone, please press 3. If you have joined by computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon, and this can vary by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raised hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. It may also be located under the reactions menu or more menu. Tonight, we will only be taking general public comment for the planning policy. We won't be taking comment on the Title 18 updates, as that was a public hearing that has been closed. But please feel free to provide public comment for the second part of tonight, which will be on zero lot lines as well as block length that Minnie will be presenting. So it is appropriate to either discuss general public comments or Minnie's presentation. But again, we are not looking for public comment about the Title 18 updates at this time. When recognized, please unmute your microphone, state your name, speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. And when you are finished, please mute your microphone. And if you do not respond after your name or your phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you are able. And so, Stephen, has anyone from the public signed up to make general comments?
We have one in-room signed up. Councilmember Hunt.
Good evening. Hello. It's great to be here in person. Good evening, Chair Voice, Commissioner Lewis, and Commissioners Bader and Monahan. My name is Victoria Hunt. I live in the Tallis neighborhood, and I am so glad to be here back in person with you. So welcome back to Council Chambers. I serve on the Issaquah City Council. I'm in my 5th year, and actually before I was on council, I served on this very commission, the Planning Policy Commission, and actually served with Commissioner Lewis. And so it is great to be back with you here this evening, and I really just wanted to say thank you so much for all of the time and effort and thoughtfulness with which you consider and deliberate on issues. The work that you do is really important to our process on council, and it's really important to the community for getting the outcomes that they are looking for, and that fulfills the vision that we have for Issaquah. So I wanted to say thank you. I know it's a lot of work. I know firsthand that it's a lot of time and effort, and really wanted to thank you for taking the time. And also wanted to open up channel of communication. If you have questions about how council does things or how we're thinking about things, please always feel free to reach out, and would love to talk with you. So again, thank you, and I look forward to hearing the rest of your conversation this evening.
Chair Voice, that's the only public comment signed up for tonight.
All right, well, I don't think I'm being biased in saying thank you, Victoria. Those were fantastic comments. And yes, the planning policy produces a lot of rock stars, including our very own council member, Victoria. So thank you. And as far as a public comment, we're through with that. So the next item on the agenda is the continuation of the public hearing for Title 18, Zoning and Development Standard Updates. Tonight is the deliberation portion of the public hearing. So I'm hoping that all of our clarifying questions have already been asked. And really, we're just looking to have a brief presentation on what we've already heard, possibly a couple small questions, but again, hopefully most of the questions have already been asked. And then the planning policy will have the opportunity to deliberate on the 4 different presentations in front of us. Oh, should we address it a little later? Okay. So after staff provides a quick summary of the public comments with the scope of this project and responses, we will move on to the policy questions for the planning policy deliberation and direction. As we did on July 20th, we will start with transfer of development rights, or TDRs, move to affordable housing, then move on to landmarks and archaeological resources, and conclude with parking. We'll deliberate after all of the presentations. So staff, I believe, there you go.
I'm Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with the Community Planning and Development Department. And yes, as Chair Voice mentioned, we are deliberating on Bucket 5 tonight, which contains transfer of development rights, affordable housing, landmarks and archaeological resources, and parking. So I'm going to start with transfer of development rights again and just give you a quick overview. So what are they? They allow transfer development rights. The program allows for one parcel, the receiving site, to have increased development while protecting another parcel, which is the sending site, from future development. And all of this is at the owner's discretion. This is not something the city says you are a part of this. People opt into this program. Sending sites are typically, as they currently stand, they are sites with 50% or more of their land is encumbered by critical areas. And development rights can be bought and sold between public agencies, between private entities, or between private and public entities. Transfer development rights can be banked to preserve land now and use later in the future. So we had that happen not too long ago. Someone dedicated land to the city as part of the TDR program. Just a portion of that land was sold, and so we still have transfer of development rights, or development rights sitting in a bank with the city. And they can be used for 4 things. On the receiving sites, it can be used to increase impervious, increase height, increase floor area ratio, or FAR, and to increase density. Next slide, please. So just to show you where these rights are, the sending sites are located in the green. They're shown in the green, and the red are the receiving sites. So major changes that we made in order to try and address the protection of hillsides goal, we have added hillsides. So any parcels with 50% of their site as 20% to 39% slope, it can now apply to be a potential sending site. density calculations that were used to determine how much density can actually get transferred were in a different location that was moved into this area, or into this chapter, I apologize. Changing levels of review for additions and removals of sending sites is something that we're proposing. We just need to figure that out as part of bucket 6. But right now, one is sending sites are level 1 and receiving sites are level 3 review. But both of those should really technically be probably level 6s because it is a code change. And then we codified what the bank does. We knew there's a bank out there. We didn't quite know what they could and couldn't do and how things were calculated. So we've tried to codify that. Next slide. And then there was only one comment last time from the Development Commission and the public, which is what does transit stop mean? And that's a good point. We need to go back and clarify if that's every individual bus stop within the city or if that's like a park and ride or transit center. So we need to clarify that. Next slide, please. I'm going to move on to affordable housing. So what is it? In the content of this chapter, housing has covenants that are attached to it stating that it will remain affordable for a determined amount of time. And ownership is one level and rental is another level. Income levels for this range from anywhere from 30% of the King County area median income, or just the 80 AMI, to 80% of the AMI. And that means that those people make 30% of, the 100% that, what most people make in the county. Issaquah allows covenants up to 120%. And I just mentioned that because while what counts as our affordable housing goes anywhere from, 0 to 80% of the King County affordable AMI, we do have units that go up to 120. Those are all located in the Highlands. And those don't count towards our affordable housing counts, but we do have them and they have covenants. So, next slide, please. Major changes to affordable housing. We have updated the code to match other ARCH jurisdictions. This makes it easier for us and for ARCH. Not only, it makes it consistent among all the cities. There's no ambiguity there. We are proposing to change the 30-year affordability level for rental to the life of the project because the 30-year met the bank requirements, but not necessarily the city's needs. We codified the quality of affordable units. So in particular, it's all the units, but if you have affordable units within a complex that also contains market rate units, those need to be compatible with each other. So that's something that we've always tried to enforce, but because it hasn't been codified, it's been sort of difficult. We are proposing to remove the flexible standard of the reduction of recreation space for affordable units because that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then we've added requirements, two things. We've added requirements for offsite, for alternative compliance. We have amended the requirements for the location of these. It used to have to be within the same sub area, and now it can be outside the sub area. We also added a payment in lieu as an alternative compliance option. So next slide, please. So some concerns that came up. One is there is a concern about moving from a 30-year rental requirement to the life of use as residential. So that's something that we need to double check with ARCH and see. Most other cities that I know do this, so we just need to make sure that there haven't been any issues with the banks. And then there was a question about what happens with affordable rentals when covenants are converted to condominiums, and are they required to stay affordable? That's another good question we need to do a little more research into. And then there was a note that someone would like to see 30% AMI included in the inclusionary zoning, but that's a policy discussion that would need to be had at a later time. And that's all I have for those two.
All right, next we're going to talk about landmarks and archaeological resources. So, what is this section about? It encourages the protection, preservation, and enhancement of historic resources that are associated with important past events, themes, and people. In this section, it's going to talk about the Landmarks Commission, the nomination process, what that looks like in order to have a complete application, also the designation process, as well as the designation criteria. So in 2001, the city entered into an interlocal agreement with King County to provide Issaquah assistance with respect to historic preservations. So the board, the King County Landmarks and Heritage Commission, which is made up of 9 members, they're the ones that review landmark nomination and determine designation status for landmarks within the city of Issaquah. So far, we have about 6 landmarks. And the newest designation is the Cutes Garage building on Sunset Way. So some of the changes that occurred in this section are we've added a fee recovery section. This allows the city to recoup any costs that we have to pay on behalf of the applicant. Another change was that a big change was that we no longer basically inserted King County's code into our code. Instead, we're going to be adopting by reference. I did some research. A lot of cities do this. It's very common. It allows us to simplify our code, and it allows our code to remain up to date. We also added the Landmarks Commission section, which essentially is codifying the Landmarks Commission's authority to make decisions on the city's behalf. And we're also codifying the special member position, which is that representative that reviews Issaquah nominations for us. Also in the code, we try to be more aligned with our interlocal agreement. And so we added some language that basically states that the city's building official will consider county's historic preservation officer's comment should someone submit a building permit wanting to make revisions to a landmark. And one of the last changes that we made was we tried to update some of our references. One of them is the violations. The city recently updated a new code enforcement section. So now the landmarks section will reference that code so that the code enforcement officer can properly enforce. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Valerie. So next we'll be discussing parking regulations. Next slide, please. Great. So yeah, again, thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for this opportunity to present this information again. So as Chair Voice said, the slide deck is the same as last time. So I'll just quickly run through some background information and then talk about the major changes proposed for this update. So as defined by the Title 18 Council Ad Hoc Committee, there's 4 high-level goals and associated objectives related to the parking section update. The first goal is to modernize the code and incorporate best practices by creating a well-organized and clear code that improves public access to information, provides tools that address community needs, and helps create the kinds of places that the community expects. The second goal is to provide adequate parking while utilizing land efficiently by minimizing the amount of land and associated impacts related to parking, recognizing that the varied amenities, services, and needs are around the city, and ensuring that reasonably adequate parking is there for those who are reliant on personal vehicles, while also planning for the future conversion of garages and surface level parking lots. The third goal is to increase housing diversity by providing or retaining housing at a cost point rarely found in the city, encouraging small housing types for the improved affordability of housing around the city, and increasing affordability and ownership. Lastly, the fourth goal of this parking section update is to effectively manage travel resulting from new development in line with non-motorized transit and climate goals by establishing electric vehicle ready code, which is essentially the requirement for power facilities for the future installation of electric vehicle chargers. Next slide, please. So today, staff is proposing 8 major changes to realign our parking code to better support our community's adopted vision, goals, and policies. These first 3 changes relate to the goal of modernizing our code and incorporating best practices. So number 1, we're proposing consolidating and removing redundant codes in order to simplify and support the enforceability of the code during the development review process. Number 2 is the adaptation and creation of intent sections, which provide more consistent application and regulation of code. 3 is the wholesale replacement of shoulds and musts. This language really helps to eliminate vagueness and improve the enforceability of the code. Next slide, please. Change 4 includes the updating of a portion of the off-street parking requirements with the parking regulation estimates based on the most current version of the Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual. This change is proposed as a result of discussions with affinity groups, the Development Commission, and PPC's desire to have regulations that are based on consistent and predictable metrics. ITE parking generation rates are the nationally recognized standard and will allow for the city to provide adequate parking, resulting in a more efficient use of the land. Change 5 includes the consolidation of parking requirements into 2 tiers. These tiers are based on land use context and neighborhood characteristics. These characteristics recognize that there's a difference between the parking demand between neighborhoods that support dense growth and those that don't. So again, tier 1 is representative of central Issaquah, the Issaquah Highland commercial areas, and the Old Town neighborhood. And these requirements are to accommodate the multimodal goals for urban development. And the tier 2 is all other parts of the city, which we know are less dense. Next slide, please. Change 6 involves updating existing parking regulations for bikes, and this is to support the Mobility Master Plan's goals for a multimodal supported system. This section was expanded upon per the direction of the PPC and provides more details on what is required and where to encourage more bicycle amenities in more urban parts of the city. Change 7 is an update to the shared parking provision and incorporates modern best practices with a flexible parking tool that recognizes market demands influenced by a project's geographic location and other land uses. And finally, staff is proposing to update the electric vehicle parking regulations to support the implementation of the Issaquah Climate Action Plan, or ICAP, and federal EV requirements. These changes are adjustments to the EV-ready parking stall requirements and minor adjustments to the EV charging station, or EVSE, requirements. Next slide, please. And so again, these are the major changes that staff is proposing, and these are the questions for PPC to consider. With that, I am done with my presentation.
All right, well, thank you, staff. Fantastic presentations. And if the commission would allow me, I think maybe we just unpack this one topic at a time. So I think we'll just start with TDRs, and we can deliberate on TDRs, and then we'll move to the affordable housing, landmarks, and parking. So we'll begin with TDRs. Does anyone have comments?
Chair, I'd love to make a comment, but I will mention that for each topic, I would love to give an opportunity for our remote commissioners to go first so that we don't stomp over them because we're here in person. So I will start this off tonight, as I often do. I want to start out telling Kristen and staff, I think you guys did a fantastic job on TDRs. I see a huge leap in progress from where we've been previously, and there's been a lot of changes that needed to happen, and so I want to not only acknowledge that, but say thank you, because reading this section really was a pleasure because I know what it's entailed and where it's come. I'm curious if it's worth having a little bit more discussion, not necessarily here, but internally with staff about language that we want to do, specifically with, we talk about maintenance costs for the fund, and I'm curious about how that ends up adding up and coming out of the fund. For instance, there's mentions about maintaining a website. I'm not quite sure why that can't roll into the general city budget for maintaining the website, why it would be separate. And I'm just kind of curious about what those maintenance costs will end up entailing and taking away from the TDR fund. And so having it all kind of come out of that bank, I'm curious if that move was purposeful because it's a large charge that would end up impacting the budget, and that's the direction that council has put us to, or if it just kind of was more of a neat, tidy bucket. And if staff wants to comment on it, but hey, Minnie.
I can take that stab at that answer. So I think that's carryover from before, Commissioner. And you know, it gets very technical and complicated in terms of managing some of these, where things are coming and going from and all that kind of stuff. So King County has this program where they just kind of, you know, do it for the cities that they participate in their interlocal agreement. They've offered that to us as well. So it's just a placeholder. You know, it's not like we're charging them, but if it gets complex, then it's something that the city has to set up the program, staffing costs to manage and monitor all of that. So it's you know, it hasn't been used for administration purposes ever, is our understanding. The other thing I'd like to quickly add, since I'm talking about the TDRs, is I think in your packet we have a more complete response to all the comments that were submitted on this topic. And one big one, I think, is we have a map that shows the sending sites, but then we have text language that talks about if your property is zoned community facilities. So anytime we have a park acquisition, we change the zoning to make it community facilities. That doesn't qualify for a TDR. So we do need to fix that in the next round because it defeats the purpose of preserving open space. And if it's a park and once you give it a different zoning. So there's a disconnect between the map and the language that was carried forward from before, and we do intend to fix it with the next time.
Thank you, Minnie. That was one thing that I also had as a comment of wanting to make sure that there are language supported all of our park zoning that included open space, because right now the way that it's written makes you think maybe it's going to be one particular type of zone, whereas I believe we have 4, if I'm correct, Chair Voice, that fall into that bucket of parks that would be able to be a sending site. Different zones that could be. So thank you. That's very helpful. So I would want to put a pin on that because I understand since King County's been maintaining this in a very different way than what we're taking over now, to have staff kind of keep an eye on that and say, how are those maintenance costs really, where are they coming from, and how are we folding in, and kind of how is that impacting the fund, I think is something that's worth keeping an eye on right now from how it's done. And then Minnie, since I have you, my other thing with TDRs that I'm a little bit worried about is I appreciated very much the change of level review to a level 6, because that means that we're going to have really good eyes on it. We're going to have community involvement. We're going to be able to have a little bit of an extra touch with these things. What I don't want to have happen is that we end up having an effective receiving site wall that will end up coming up, right? When you start adding the increased height, when you start having the increased density, we're going to have a balance of then having a blocking of view corridors, right? The density has to be able to go somewhere. And what I'm worried about is eventually this density kind of all clustering in the same spot, because honestly that's what we want, right? We're trying to keep it in central Issaquah, and then having an effect that maybe we're not hoping to have. So being able to kind of have eyes on, are there restrictions to which sites are able to be built up as things grow, and as we anticipate this density going somewhere, we want to know, I mean, is there going to be any restrictions? I don't know that we need to have code and language in it right now, but it's certainly something that I want staff to have an eye on, of saying, how are we going to be managing maybe it's creekside properties, right, that are able to put more of that density. Maybe it's this kind of conjoining of properties that will end up being built up, but I think it's worth keeping an eye on. Those are my only comments on TDRs, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Would anyone else like to comment on the TDR? Seeing none, going once. I think that's it. Like I said, I actually think it was pretty well written. I think the staff did a fantastic job on, actually, I'm spoiler alert, on all 4 of them. There's a couple of comments I have for the next ones, but the TDRs look pretty good. So, moving on.
One last thing, Chair, I wanted to add on the TDRs, just this is more FYI. I think it's included in your packet as part of the comments. So the interlocal that we have with the King County is no longer in effect. It expired in 2014. So we'll be having the conversation with council if that needs to be renewed and if that needs to be added to the future updates list or how best to address that. But basically, right now, this section would apply to if you want to preserve open space within the city from one of your sending sites, you can do that. If with this interlocal, it was the Issaquah Creek Basin outside the city limits that were in King County, if some of those TDR units could be transferred for additional development capacity within the city limits, so, which is no longer in effect, and that is something that I think Lakeside has asked to renew, and so we'll be having that conversation with the City Council. So that's just FYI for Planning and Policy Commission.
Great, thank you, Minnie.
Yeah.
And we are now moving along to affordable housing.
Yes.
Correct. Affordable housing. Any comments about affordable housing?
Commissioner Bader has a comment.
Commissioner Bader?
Yeah, thanks. I'll jump in here. I think, this is Sarah Bader, I think in general that the updates were good. I wanted to follow up to the question that I'd asked last week about whether there was any expansion to where the inclusionary zoning applied to, and my understanding was that work will be happening separately. And so I just wanted to state for the record that I would like to see that happen. I don't think that the code as written now will do enough, just kind of keeping that requirement where it is in central Issaquah, do enough to help us meet our affordable housing targets. So wanted to just state, I don't know what the timeline is for that work, but look forward to seeing that come to fruition.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lewis?
Thank you. I'm going to piggyback and second Commissioner Bader's comments. I certainly am curious if these percentages, if the administration really feels like this number of units is going to support our housing goals. It feels like a slow crawl. It has been a slow crawl. We've seen progress. There's been wonderful things that have happened in the last decade, but I'm curious, the way that these numbers are written, I feel like it keeps us at a pace that doesn't align to our housing goals with affordable housing. And so I think that that's something that's worth going back to our various boards and commissions and talking about the incentives that we want to do. That's a different situation, I think, from this Title 18 code update, but it's something that we've had really productive conversations with in the past, and I would encourage us to do another round of them like that we've done previously with different boards and commissions in the community. And I am curious for staff to kind of make a comment to say, we think these numbers will or will not, and how that actually connects us to our housing goals. Probably a Kristen comment or a question. Or a Minnie.
Yeah, we do have an affordable housing issue. It's more than just planning policy tools that get us there. But what I also want to kind of let all of you know that there's, the state law was changed. So Department of Commerce is working on this methodology for allocating the share, what the cities need to do for affordable housing. So there's a lot of work that's happening at the regional level and King County to really establish some of these goals for affordable housing. Of course, we have, I think in your packet, we say 40%. And so whether we're meeting that, obviously we know we're not. But it's not an easy, easy thing to do. The inclusionary zoning expansion at outside of the central Issaquah, that's certainly something we're looking at. So we have this grant money that we got from the state to study how to implement our housing strategies. So the city did a lot of work on housing strategies, and there are 9 of them. The one is the inclusionary zoning piece. The other one is how do we have a diversity of housing choices, which is also one of the goals of this particular Title 18 update. And in that, we're trying to study, how to remove the barriers for condominium development, because we're seeing there were some state law changes that occurred from a liability standpoint, but we're still not seeing people wanting to build condos on a scale that increases the home ownership as well as housing diversity options. So there's a lot more work for the cities, for the region, on this topic. And there are conversations occurring. There's things that are going on, and in particular for our case, really spending the time understanding what it's going to take us to get those 3 strategies, that we talked about with this grant work. So that'll come back to Planning and Policy Commission next year. So our grant goes till mid next year, I believe. So we're going to be doing a lot of background work, and then if any code amendments need to come out of that work, they'll be in front of Planning and Policy, for you all to weigh in.
Thank you, Minnie. Commissioner Lewis?
The only other thing I wanted to mention, Minnie, about what we're looking at right now for the affordable housing code changes is we have a lot of good code that specifically tries to address parity and making sure that when affordable housing units are mixed in with market rate housing units, that they are on the same level. And so some of the language, we talk about that we want to make sure that between the cost of construction for a prototype, for instance, if we're getting payments in lieu of, and what I wanted to make sure of is that there's some sort of double check, right? A projected amount for a prototype versus how things actually get built and that kind of follow up, and being able to have an adjustment of saying, this is what we thought was working, but it turns out that there's a discrepancy, and being able to update that. Sometimes it's hard to be able to have eyes on how that actually happens in real time on a project, and I think it's an incredibly important part of the equity piece of this. And so I just wanted to make mention, I don't know that it's appropriate to put into code, but I do think that there needs to be some sort of measure of double check of making sure that we're following through on our intent as written right now. That was my only other comment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. I'll just add my comment. So I think as far as the way it's written, the different goals and the different changes look great. So I am a little bit concerned. We typically in this city, I love the city, I've lived here for almost 20 years, but we typically have, we lean on the developers quite a bit. And I happen to work in the field, and again, I don't always hear the kind of things about our beautiful, lovely city as far as a developer. And again, it can't be just done in a vacuum. Whether it's things as little as not being able to work Saturdays. We were able to get the affordable housing in the Westridge land agreement because that was built into it. But getting a private developer to come in and build a set of apartments, again, I get the feeling sometimes like Issaquah does not like developers. I hear it when we're talking on different commissions, and again, it's important to have high standards. I think a lot of this, as far as the different changes, all look good. One of the concerns I have, and I'm glad it was brought up in the presentation, is I would like to know what is the con of going from 30-year to the lifetime of the property. I'd like to know what the banks feel about that. And I know you guys are going to circle back and let us know, but that's a big shift. And again, what does that do for financing? And how does that impact the developers and people that would be taking on this project, especially at the spec level? So a few concerns. Again, we lean on our developers quite a bit. We ask the best of them, but it can't simply be a one-way street, and we expect that we're going to get all the goodies without some give. Would anyone else like to make a comment as far as affordable housing? Commissioner Lewis is the only one I can look at. So. All right. Thank you. And now we're going to move on to landmarks. So, commissioners looking for comments on landmarks.
Don't everybody go at once. I'll start us off on this because Valerie, mine is pretty simple. It's kind of an idea. So Valerie, you'd given us this really great slide that talked about landmarks, and I don't want to make an assumption, but how many preservation landmark sites do we have? I'm hoping that wasn't all of them, but it may have been.
That was the bulk of them. We may have maybe one or two more that could be added to the list, but for the most part, that was it.
I didn't want to assume, but it was my assumption. So I guess one thing that I was curious about was kind of the appointments in section B1. We talk about the appointment terms, and at the rate of which these are going to be coming in, and the rate of which they're going to be looked at to then have a turnover in term, and we're serving 3 years, no more than 2 consecutive terms. It might be plausible that somebody could serve those 2 terms and maybe see one application to then need to turn over to have somebody else who then doesn't have that same experience. And I think of it as a biased way of how I've come into my work as a commissioner, and the ramp up time that it takes to getting to understand the process, ask particular things. And so I would love for staff to kind of talk a little bit about why these particular appointment time lengths, why you guys feel that this is appropriate for this particular venue, right? Why maybe it's worth doing 4 years instead of 3. I don't want to nitpick, but at the same time, I have a concern about this being an important position that tends to have high turnover with little familiarity because of how much we do it. I don't know if that's a relevant thing to talk about, but that was what kind of jumped out to me. So if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it's a great comment. Yeah, clearly something's not working because our list is so small. But yeah, I mean, as far as the learning curve and getting used to, serving in a different capacity and not being able to see any type of landmark come across your desk for up to a year to 2 years, 2/3 of the way into your term. And
or
then,
you might just finally be like, I got the hang of this,
Right.
and then you got to hand it off.
and then you're handing it off. So I think that's a salient point. So would anyone else like to comment on landmarks? All right, thank you. Parking, we'll probably get some more responses for parking. Commissioner Bader.
Can you pull up the questions again that we were supposed to respond to?
Yeah, if we'd like, would we just want to go through those questions?
Let's start with that. That's great.
Yeah, okay. Please, if, I know Ms. Porter likes being the presenter, but yeah, if we could pull those up.
Can you see the questions?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
So I guess I'll read them aloud and then we'll see if anyone wants to jump in with yay or nay. Does the draft code support Planning Policy Commission's direction to clarify short-term and long-term bike parking regulations and to elevate the bike amenity?
I will start off with a broad yes. I want to say thank you. This was direct feedback that we had given, and it feels good. I gotta say, I really appreciate it. I do think that there are some tweaks that can happen to this. I think overarching, it's a big yes. But I do think that there are some things that have been pointed out previously about location, right? Security issues of location right now, I think, are trying to be addressed, and right now the code ends up making it, for instance, having to have bike racks right near the main entrance, I think might be problematic, and maybe we could adjust that to including things like a garage entrance I think that when a building has security on site or has camera access, whatever security concerns we're trying to address, I think that there is room to be able to change this a little bit so that bike parking is able to be included in a variety of places and spaces, and hopefully enlarged, right? Rather than just having the minimum that's required. I think there's a little bit of tweaks that can be done there. I think also when we start talking about shower facilities, I think that's something that we need to kind of dive into of how that ends up actually getting used and actually getting done. So I do think there are some tweaks that need to happen for our next draft, but I want to say a thank you because I do think this supports our intent very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. It clearly, I think, supports what we are trying to do as far as the short-term and long-term, as far as being a multimodal city. My concern is more, to kind of piggyback on Commissioner Lewis, is how it's implemented, right? So the shower thing, and at what number? You know, do we have any type of evidence from other cities? I mean, how often are these things used? Do people even enjoy public showers like that? Again, and then I also, I think somewhere, I'm not going to be able to find it at the moment, but there was also, if we get to a certain level, 50% of it is covered. What does that look like? And then again, to Commissioner Lewis's point, if that's in front of an entrance, you know, how does that work with the eaves and things like that? So there are definitely some particulars to work out as far as the bike storage racks and things like that.
I think this may be a good example of, you know, we've kind of actually beat up staff on our shoulds versus our musts, right? But this is kind of an area where maybe some shoulds would be appropriate when we start talking about, I know there's a little bit of discussion about material. I think there could be more discussion about material and design of how we can make bike racks be a little bit more presentable and friendly and approachable. I think there's been a lot of great examples over the years of things we can do. And so it may be that we need to have a few more shoulds about that included into language without being overly prescriptive, but also allowing more space. I know, for instance, when we talk about showers, I think that it's easy to think about towel service, right? Are we then having somebody bring their wet towel to their desk, right? I mean, like, there's a little bit that needs to be worked out of saying, what is the expectation? And I think it would be very interesting to be able to have, whether it be biking advocate groups, be able to comment about, this is what we found have worked, because I think that we're coming a little bit short. The intent is there. I love it. I think there's a little more flushing, so to speak.
Yeah, this would be a good time for our former commissioner, Commissioner Fowl, who liked to bike to and from work.
Shout out Ron and his cinnamon tea.
Yes. So, and I can't believe I heard Commissioner Lewis advocating for more shoulds. But, you
Only
know,
the silver.
stranger things have happened. So, yeah, I think the intent is good, and but there are definitely some particulars that might not necessarily be, maybe not thought out 100%, or at least I don't see it. Because again, if we're, I don't know how, that's basically what I wrote down on my agenda a few different times. What does this look like? What does this look like? So.
Yeah.
All right, so any other comments on question 1?
I think question 2 leads us to shared parking. I really have to give a shout out to Commissioner Mel Morgan. I thought his comments last meeting for the joint commission meeting were extremely relevant and very helpful. One thing that I've been very excited by this. I think it's something that has been very successful in various cities that I've lived in, and I've been surprised that we haven't had it already. So I'm very encouraged that we're using it. And I was very encouraged by Commissioner Mel Morgan talking about an example right here in our own city of how it's been successful. I would like to see maybe a review of use as we have for shared parking, kind of like, you know, are we tracking that the spaces that are adequate, right? Is this actually working for the two parties? With the city, it's a 3-party system, but you really have these 2 different sites that are working together. Are we finding that they're at max capacity? Are we finding that they're not being used? It would be nice to have a little bit of tracking to see, is this tool successful? I think it's also relevant for us to start talking about things like a fallout of use, right? Oil spills from vehicles, increase in trash, right? Is there adverse effects that end up happening that we're not accounting for, and how do we have maybe a mitigation process of how parties are able to come together when they're in a contract for a shared parking space that maybe has uses beyond the actual space or use. may be relevant. I know that there's been issues like with that in Seattle. We may not, but it's something that would be nice as we implement this program to kind of figure out how is this working and how are we tracking it. But I certainly enjoy this as being a tool for us to utilize. I think it's underserved, and I think it'll be really successful.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Does anyone else like to discuss the shared parking question? Most of what I had a concern was with just how the covenants work. You know, I know probably can't go back retroactively. I love the Village Theater, full stop. Just saw Mamma Mia there at the end of June. But it is crazy how when the theater is having a production night, it just swamps all of that parking. You know, one of my favorite places to get teriyaki, can't even park there. So, and I love Simon. So again, there's some concerns, but I'm more interested in seeing it used and used well. I just more interested in kind of how the covenants work, but it'd be nice to see if it could be retroactive. I don't think it can, unfortunately. All right, moving on to number 3. Should the city consider raising the amount of required EVSE and EV-ready parking stalls? I hear exasperation. It's the same way I feel. Feels like we've been here before. This is deja vu all over again. Would anyone like to comment on the EVSE and EV-ready parking stalls? Now, I guess just a quick question, and I know we're not supposed to be asking clarifying questions, but real quickly now, these are minor changes that are being implemented because of the state that updated their guidelines, or is this something completely different? Am I getting that right? This is to match state and federal guidelines that have shifted in the last, 4 months?
Chair Voice, you're referring to the increase in the EV regulations?
Right.
The changes we made were actually in accordance with the ICAP goals and trying to push for more of the EV in the shift. A lot of the market is driving that because of the new federal regulations. The question is more about to meet more of the ICAP goals. Should we consider increasing it even more?
Thank you, Stephen.
So I'm going to jump into that question and give a resounding yes. I'm incredibly proud of the work that this particular commission did when we first went through and presented this to council. We really helped spearhead the EV ready, and I'm incredibly proud of that. The cost of having buildings be EV ready when built versus having to retroactive is astounding. And I think when we look at the direction that Governor Inslee has given since we did that work, and we see these goals that he's put forward. I mean, 100% of new car sales by 2035 should be zero emission. It's a no-brainer right now that we, especially in the category of the number of EV-ready parking spaces, increase these numbers. I think it's an impressive how many members of our community have voiced to us that this is a priority to them, not only in how they've come to in public discussion, but also in polls, when we've gotten feedback from the city on polls that have been conducted and how people have prioritized different things. So, you know, with as far as the equipment piece of this goes for the EVSE, it's constantly changing, right? And to be able to have the difference between like 3-pin, which can take you 24 hours to charge, versus a supercharge, which, you know, can be like 80%, like 45 minutes or something, right? You have such a huge swath of things, and that technology is constantly changing. So I'm hesitant to make a developer need to put in the equipment. However, being able to have the appropriate voltage, right, and being able to have the ability and that infrastructure, to me, is incredibly important. So if we were going to be, as a commission, having this discussion to be advising council, I would say that for me it sits really in the EV ready parking spaces. Being able to increase that is where I sit, but I want to hear from every single one of you guys.
Everybody heard that. Commissioner Lewis wants to hear from all of us. I'm going to take the alternate track. You know, again, I could probably be pushed around and cajoled and convinced that the EVSE ready, where we have the conduit and things in the wall ready to go, could possibly be increased. But again, I'm kind of of the firm belief, you know, I'd like to see some action, because again, I think I quoted last time, a couple meetings ago, at the most generous, I think Washington State is currently 4% EV cars on the road. So again, these are all things that always can be come back to. But to start requiring it of every development and every builder, these larger numbers, again, they're not the one who's going to pick up the cost. It's going to be the consumer. It will be passed on. So again, I hear what Commissioner Lewis is saying as far as the 2035, and we all hope so. But again, these are all rules that we can always come back to, and these can always be put on the docket annually. So I can probably put around for the EVSE, harder for me to get my head around actually having the ports and everything ready to go.
Well, so I think we agree right now, as we're saying, EV ready is having the 220 in the wall.
Oh, do I have it back? Do I have my acronyms backwards?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So the EV ready is the one with the conduits and everything, all the electronics and everything ready to go in the wall. All they got to do is punch a hole in the wall and get
Well,
something.
in theory, the plug should be there. I'm sorry.
Right.
In theory, the plug should be there, right? So you have your 220 that you're able to then plug your equipment into, right? So conduit lines, electricity, ready to go, plug and play, versus the EVSE parking spaces is you're actually able to charge, right? Charge a
Right.
fee, right? Because that's the other thing too, is that it's not just that ability for the various types of speed of which you're able to charge, but then you have to have the ability to be able to charge.
EVSE is
cost
where
of
you
it.
just
charge,
break.
charge is such a loaded word because I'm using it in two terms, but so I think we're saying the same thing, is that you would also agree about having an increase for the readiness.
I said I could be pushed around.
Okay.
But yes, to Commissioner Lewis's point, yes, if I got my acronyms turned around, I could be probably, I could see the increase as far as putting the conduits and things ready to go. Harder for me to see the actual package where someone just drives up with a hose and literally plugs into something, because again, I'm a little fearful we're still at 4%. Same thing, just different way. Would anyone else like to comment on the electric charging stations?
Chair Voice, Commissioner Monahan has a comment.
Commissioner Monahan.
Yeah, hey, I think all in all, I'm generally in favor of more EV-ready parking stalls, but I'm also a firm believer that if folks building buildings think that they're going to get value out of it, they'll build them anyway. And so I'd like there to be a mechanism to revisit this maybe once every 2 years and not, once every other meeting. Because to Jason's point, like, we're not there yet. We're trying to get there with the number of electric cars. So I'd just like to see some kind of mechanism to revisit this, maybe once every 2 years as the numbers start to bear out the climate goals that we're all reaching for. So, thank you.
Commissioner Bader also has a comment.
Commissioner Bader.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I wiped some dust off my computer before and screwed up the audio, so I'm on my phone now. I agree. I think with the EV readiness part, I think it gets us closer to where we need to be, and maybe if there's more availability of that, then there's more electric cars that kind of come along with that. And so I just want to agree. I really just agree with what's been said around the readiness piece.
Thank you, Commissioner Bader. Is there anyone who else would like to speak on the electric vehicle charging?
I think my only question is for staff is, we seem to have a bit of a consensus to not move EVSE. However, to move EV ready, I don't think we're at a point right now where we're willing to recommend a percentage. And so if we're not being helpful to staff for how they approach this for the next draft, to please let us know how we can help them. Because right now we're just kind of giving you one thumbs up and one thumbs down. So if it's not helpful, please kick it back to us and let us know.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Yeah, the staff will be evaluating for the second draft, and we were really trying to determine if we should spend time on looking into it a little bit further or not. And so that was kind of where we're trying to get for. If we have more specific questions for the second draft on kind of percentages, we'll bring that in the next public hearings or the meetings with you.
All right, thank you. Was there a second page of parking questions? I don't believe so.
Chair voice, I think these were it.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak on any of the 4 topics we've discussed? Any final comments? All right, well, we thank you for that discussion. And we are now going to move along to our follow-up discussion on subdivisions. This item is a follow-up from Bucket 3 Subdivisions, and the Planning, Development, and Environmental Council Committee has asked staff to bring this topic back for further feedback from PPC. And this is Minnie's presentation. So please, Minnie.
Yeah, thank you, commissioners. So this is a topic that you all weighed in previously. It was bundled in with a bunch of other things. So we pulled this piece out that the council committee, Planning, Development and Environment Committee, has asked the commission to relook at a couple of these things with a different lens that we missed in our last iteration with you. So, how does these 2 particular items affect housing diversity goal that was set up as for this current update? So in your packet, we've broken it up into 2 different things. So let's talk about the maximum block length of 250 feet requirement. What the subdivision chapter did was it added a design section because that was one of the goals. Currently, our subdivision design doesn't have a requirement for open space or, design with your hillsides or anything that discusses how the street network should be laid out and such. So we put a placeholder, and then think in your packet we pulled out that section so you have a complete design section included. And one of the items there was that that if you're building new streets, the maximum block length is 250 feet. One of the comments, or a couple of comments we received on that, was that it probably doesn't make sense for all the neighborhoods in the city. And I think Development Commission and Planning and Policy Commission was leaning in your earlier deliberations towards not being so prescriptive about this requirement because of the topography and other things that might come into play. So we've laid out a couple of options. One is to keep the way it is written in the draft of 250-foot block length throughout the city. The other one was where you do have more Central Issaquah, Talus, and Highlands, where there is more opportunity to have these kind of maximum block lengths in the code, that we limit it to those 3 neighborhoods. But if for the other neighborhoods, there's some general language in that design section that talks about connecting to existing streets and such. So if for instance, I think in your previous examples, we'd shown you some examples where you have a subdivision side by side, you would make that street connection. However, if you were the only subdivision there and there's no street to connect to, we wouldn't require a maximum block length of 250 feet. So we've given you the pros and cons for citywide versus only to these 3 neighborhoods. And our recommendation is to keep it for 3 neighborhoods. However, I think the city should revisit the whole street network as part of Title 12, talks about public streets. So some more thoughtful discussion about this total street network in the city should occur, but it shouldn't be a requirement when we don't have that full analysis for different parts of the city. That's where we've landed on that. The 0 lot line was the other topic, and I think there was some confusion about what a zero lot line is. And so we've given you in your packet, it's a detached single family home. So it's, townhomes that are attached. We already put in the code a provision to have unit lot subdivision. So you can sell it fee simple. However, for zero lot lines, it's really an alternate layout of the house relative to the property lines, but the form of the development is still a detached home. And a lot of times these are used when you have a smaller lot size and you're trying to use land efficiently. So instead of having 2 5-foot side yards with a fence in between, that you let one home be right at the edge of their property line so that the other neighbor can use 10 feet, and that becomes a more usable space. And so everything shifts so that you share, you have 1 10-foot setback instead of 2 5 feet. So that's what the zero lot line is. And looking at it from the lens of how do we encourage more of diversity in of housing, and how do we use land efficiently. Our recommendation on this is that perhaps it should be allowed in Central, Talus, Highlands, and other parts of the city where you have a minimum lot density of 7.26 dwelling units. So a single family small lot zone would have this opportunity. Again, it's allowing these type of lot layout configuration. It's not a requirement that everyone has to do a zero lot line. Some of the concerns that were expressed during the public comments were, is it going to densify some of the areas that and what does it do to the form of development? So it doesn't change your lot size, it doesn't change your building height or your maximum footprint, those kind of standards, but it's really giving people an opportunity to be creative with how they site the home on the lot. So our recommendation is to allow it in those 3 neighborhoods, and also in any areas that are zoned single family small lot. So that's pretty much what we've laid out. So we have a couple of questions that to prompt you to discuss. If you agree with staff's recommendation, you want to change anything, or you want additional information, we're happy to provide that.
Thank you,
That
Minnie.
concludes my presentation, Chair. Yep.
Thank you. All right. Deliberating on the last 2 topics. I guess we'll just take this apart like we did the previous ones. We'll start with block length. Anybody have any thoughts on block length? I guess I'll kick this off. And the one concern I have is I don't know what the correct number is. I know we do not want long blocks, right? We want more interconnectivity with our neighborhoods, more use out of our neighborhoods. So I'm in full agreement of having shorter lengths as far as block lengths. I just don't know if 250 feet is the number. I did some supplemental reading on this, and I heard everything from 400 to 600. Like they said, if you're at 1600, your code probably hasn't been updated since the 70s. So I'm for it. I don't know what the right number is. Is 250 the right number? How do we get to that number? I'm generally in favor of it. Why 250? And then as far as the topography and the other concerns you brought up, those are all valid. There's definitely areas in the city where it's probably not necessary to have it required, but that was my bigger one, was just where did we pull that number 250? Is it something you've seen in other comparative cities that are around us? Commissioner Lewis?
Chair Voice, Commissioner Bader has a comment.
Okay. I want Minnie to answer.
I do too.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the city's kind of proposal of like just investigating this a little bit more is good, and so I support that of kind of keeping it in the 3 areas where that block length is set. Although Chair Voice just I think made a good point about like could we think about different block lengths in different areas based on like what existing development looks like, and is that something that's also worth exploring or figuring out kind of what that right size block length is. That was a good comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Bader. Minnie, do you want to step in here, and we'll let you step in, and then we'll move along with our more comments for you.
Sure.
Oh, well, it's not a happy
Sorry.
face.
I don't know why it just popped up on my. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, the 250 block length is currently a standard in the central Issaquah. So I think that's where that came from. It is a pretty standard thing for a city block. It's really driven by how much people want to walk and all that kind of stuff. Stephen has done some additional work in terms of looking at, the central Issaquah in terms of the street grid and where that came from. I don't know, Stephen, if you want to add to where this number originated from.
Minnie is correct. It came from the central plan in terms of identifying more walkable lengths. But to speak to a little more to the research on why 250, it kind of comes around when they've looked at walkable areas and the block lengths related to them. 250 was actually in those cities where you had the most walkable area. Not to say that a 300-foot block length wasn't walkable, it just didn't have the same level of activity that those major high-density cities saw. But that's to say it was more high-density cities, not more suburban, less dense neighborhoods that were that 250 length. And so as you increase that length for the block length, it does lean towards having less activity, less walkable. Not to say that it's less walkable, it just you have less activity in those areas. And so that just kind of leans towards the type of land use and activity that you're wanting to have is not, and it's hard to say, for Talus or Highlands, it's 300 or 350. We'll need to take a look a little bit closer into what makes sense for those particular neighborhoods.
And I would add, really, there is no, 250 versus 300, and having a rectangular block rather than just 250 by 250. We can look further into where some of the legislative history of why we landed at 250 in the past. But you're right in terms of, this isn't a one number that's going to make the city more walkable. It could be tailored and fit to different parts of the neighborhood. But again, it gets down to where are the existing streets, which are the blocks that we're trying to break into, and it becomes more of a the existing street pattern is going to play a role into what that ideal number is for different parts of the city.
I really spent a lot of time on these sections, Minnie. I wanted to respect that council kicked it back to us and the administration wanted us to go back over it. And it led me to trying to think about some of my more academic work about the history of how we've planned cities, and to kind of try to look at a broader perspective on this. And I think one of the things that we were all concerned about when we had a joint meeting with the DC about this, and the public was talking about, well, how do we get to these block lengths, really involves lot consolidation. And there's a concern about neighborhood character, and there's a concern about if this is really the right tool for everywhere. I think it's very applicable for Central. I think it definitely works for the Highlands. I think there's a discussion to be made for Talus, but making this city-wide is something that I really can't get behind, because we're not building from scratch right now. We're in a city with a vast topography, and so being able to say block length I don't actually think will promote mobility in the same way that we're hoping will with a tool. You have to think about also where people are walking. I don't think it's a number of crosswalks that they take at the end of the block to be able to get there. If you have a food desert, then you're going to be getting into your car to go grocery shopping regardless of the size of your block length. If you live on Squawk, you are probably not going to be walking to all of the destinations that you then need to be carrying your retail purchases from back to your home, right? So I think that the different neighborhoods that we have, I think South Cove is another good example of things where I don't think that this works. So I'm gonna stick with our original recommendation. I think that right now we have to look at our land use. I don't think that this necessarily works for everywhere. If the city would like to put more resources into being able to actually say, we would like this to be more prescriptive in the future, and we want to be able to say, for this area, it makes sense to be a block length here and here, then I think that makes a lot of sense. But for where we are right now with the information that we have, I do want to keep it restricted and not have it be citywide.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, and I think Commissioner Lewis brings up some good points, is regardless, there's very different communities within our city. You have everything from Squaw Mountain, South Cove, that look a lot different than Talus, which is currently being developed. I think they're in phase, I don't know what phase they're on, phase 4, where they have the opportunity to implement some of this. Others were filling in the blanks and doing basically backfill. So again, I generally like the idea. I like having the mobility, the connectivity, but it is definitely going to probably vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. Issaquah, at the end of the day, is kind of a conglomeration of little townships that decided to become a city with one another. So, but we definitely have some unique neighborhoods with their own unique characteristics and perspectives. So, staff feel like they got enough there?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Minnie. And now on to 0 lot lines. Any comments on 0 lot lines?
Chair voice, Commissioner Bader has a comment. And so does Commissioner Monahan.
Commissioner Bader, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sarah Bader again. I just wanted to kind of voice my support for 0 lot lines, especially thinking of affordability. Before we moved to Issaquah, we lived in San Diego. And as like a young family trying to like establish ourselves in the housing market in San Diego, it was really hard. I know like now, like those prices would be like chump change compared to what real estate looks like. But, you know, at the time we were able to buy a 0 lot line home in a really great area in a really great school district. And I don't think we would have been able to afford to live in that area had it not been for that type of housing. And so I think it really serves a purpose, you know, to get, again, the housing diversity, you know, more affordable housing developments that are more accessible to more people, to more families. And so I think that having that as something that's allowed, again, not required, but allowed in, I think the recommendation of like the higher density areas is good, and especially like looking at new subdivisions. So I just wanted to kind of voice my support for that type of housing.
Thank you, Commissioner Bader. Commissioner Monahan, Vice Chair Monahan, apologies.
I'm really glad Sarah went first because she said something much more eloquently than I would have. So everything Sarah just said, I agree with 100%. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Vice Chair Monahan, and thank you, Commissioner Bader. Commissioner Lewis.
I think it's really important the way that Commissioner Bader spoke about it, is that it should be a tool that we use to be able to achieve a purpose. I don't necessarily believe that this is something that should be available citywide. I think that what often happens when you allow 0 lot lines everywhere is there's a tendency for homes to be built in a way that create a heat island effect. And there's also a tendency for homes to be built with fences. There's privacy issues that people end up feeling a perceived different perception of their privacy and of their space. And what you see is more fences, less community in the way that we build. Issaquah Highlands has done a fantastic job in the way that they've prescribed the building that I'm afraid wouldn't necessarily come through in the code right now for 0 lot lines. I think 0 lot lines are very applicable in Central, and I think they're applicable when we start talking about fostering micro-housing, when we try to have more affordable housing, and when we talk about things like tree retention, right? When we say you are able to do this because of other factors. We want to be able to have this be giving our community a whole picture, and so it makes sense to say this is allowed in these particular uses. What I'm not a fan of is having 0 lot lines citywide and being able to have them to be in any neighborhood regardless of the particular situation of the lot. I realize that makes it a little bit more difficult for staff because then it really ends up putting it on to the director to be able to have more allowances of saying when it's appropriate and when it's not. So that I see that as being problematic, obviously, because I'm just creating a work item in a sense. But I do think it's interesting to start thinking about zero lot lines as a tool to be achieving our means, whether it be with tree retention, whether it be with affordable housing, or whether it be with how we're building a mixed-use community, whether that be with micro-housing where we're having shared communal spaces and things like that. I think it's fantastic. But again, I would halt the idea of putting zero lot lines citywide. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, and I guess I will go last. So I personally, and this is me personally, I don't like zero lot lines for a few different reasons. Just aesthetically, big blank walls. Again, this just happens to be someone who enjoys, you know, nice elevations from their homes, and just to have blanks, even the nice trellises they put up, bother me. Again, seeing it buttressed right up against the property bothers me. But I do understand that the city's goal is to add to make way for densification. So I'm able to put aside some of my own personal feelings about zero lot lines in order to reach the city's goal, which is a stated goal by the city. And I do think it'd probably be a used tool. I'm also appreciative of the fact that it's not required. So, and there also appears to be overlays. So this is not just something where they're buttressing it right up against, and then you have two houses where there's a very, very narrow alley. It sounds like it's for unique situations already with the overlays Minnie described previously. But to Commissioner Lewis's point, definitely would not like to see this citywide. We want to concentrate this densification in certain areas of our community. Again, I could probably be pushed around and cajoled and agree to certain things. Again, personally, I don't like them, but again, it's not all about me, I suppose. So, again, so yeah, I think we would keep it to certain areas, certain districts where we are already intending to put that amount of housing and try to do the different things that Commissioner Lewis had mentioned, the cottage housing, the ADUs, the different things in order to densify certain areas. Does anyone else have a comment as far as the zero lot lines? All right, Minnie, were you able to get what you needed from that conversation?
I did. So we'll take your recommendation back to the council committee. So it sounds like we have everyone agrees with the staff's recommendation, or are there any edits or changes to that?
I mean, I think broadly we have an agreement, but again, I will get on my soapbox and say that I do think this is a tool that we should be using in to achieve a particular end, and to the chair's comment about having it be in particular areas, I think is also very applicable. And so, if you can communicate to council for us that we see a narrow lane for this.
Okay, but what the suggested narrow lane was the 3 neighborhoods and single family small lot with a density of 7.26. Do you guys agree with that, or are we missing any neighborhood in that list? Or
I only agree with it for those neighborhoods, not for all single family small lots.
So you don't disagree?
The single family small lot needs to occur within Central Tallis or the Highlands. It should not be applicable citywide, in my opinion.
So I think let me know if I'm getting this wrong. So you don't agree with the 7.26 that's kind of sprinkled throughout the city?
I do not, again, unless the city is specifically using this as a tool to be able to achieve other goals that we're trying to do with our housing. For instance, with micro-housing, cottage housing, right? If we have this particular thing, what I would like to see is that this is not something that can be in any small lot across the city. So that is where I have a disagreement with where I see the projected growth being.
So I believe, if I got this right, I believe Commissioner Lewis is coming down on
The middle, I think.
The middle
three
column.
choices.
okay.
how does Commissioner Monahan and Commissioner Bader feel?
Yeah, this is Sarah. I support it on small lot development citywide.
Okay.
Same.
Vice Chair? Same? Am I the tiebreaker? So I guess I would probably go with the 7.26 and go with Vice Chair Monahan and Commissioner Bader, just because, again, it's not a requirement. This is just a tool that would be allowed. I think Commissioner Lewis brings up some good points. It'd be nice to work in conjunction with being able to use it as a tool if there's a tree or if there's some type of critical area where then they can be encouraged to use it. But I just don't know if, again, I don't know if we can get that prescriptive. I think probably using it on the smaller ones, knowing that, it'd be interesting to know how many people actually would take advantage of it. But again, not being a requirement, I think I can get behind column 3.
Chair Voice, Commissioner Bader has an additional comment.
Commissioner Bader?
Yeah, sorry. I feel the need to advocate for my former neighborhood a little bit, in that I'll just kind of describe what it was like, because I think that the image that's kind of being conjured for folks is like solid, walls and like just paved over yards and, no vegetation at all. And I don't think that's the case. And to be honest, where I live in Tallis now, we have very small lots. We happen to have space between each lot, but we have a little patch of grass, out in the back. Our house is much bigger. But the way it was set up there was that, we had a patio area, we had a grassy area, we had trees along the solid wall that went, was our neighbor's wall that kind of went along our walkway. It was all landscaped and hedged, so it didn't feel like kind of like a blank, just wall. And so I think that especially, and that was, built in the late 80s, early 90s, I think. And so thinking of what modern development looks like, I feel pretty comfortable that they would be designed in such a way to promote, the kind of aesthetic feel that we would want, in addition to kind of, again, the kind of diversity and affordability component of it.
Minnie, it may be applicable to ask that if this is something that council wants to move forward with, that we have a design standard, that we have a place in the code that specifies when you do a 0 lot line, these are the expectations that we have. Similar to the way that we have in the Highlands, of ways that we promote community, the way that we design our spaces in a thoughtful manner. And it may just be that 0 lot lines needs to have its own section that really dives deep into how it's designed and how it comes out, right? To be able to kind of assuage ideas of how it can go wrong, let's talk about how it can go right.
I appreciate.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Minnie.
Oh, I was just going to add. So, the section in the draft right now talks about, the privacy walls, that to maintain that no windows, doors, air conditioning, or other type of opening in the walls along 0 lot line are allowed, except, where there's some clear story, those kind of things. So I think there was discussion at the council level about maybe not being that prescriptive and giving people the flexibility that if they choose to have windows and that works for them, then perhaps we don't mandate a blank wall, for instance. So we were going to relook at that section to see if we could loosen that a little bit and not have a prescriptive, you shall not have any windows along this wall kind of a approach. So there was some discussion at the council level about being prescriptive about the design for 0 lot lines and maybe not being so prescriptive that it and leaving it up to the folks that want to build this to make that call.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if, again, I kind of like Commissioner Lewis's point. Maybe it needs its own design chapter, or I don't know which way is the right way to go. Maybe you go with Minnie's suggestion and you just leave it less prescriptive. I'll be very honest, for me, I'm looking at this very superficially. I am much more worried about the aesthetics of our community. Again, I know the goals that our city has, which, this would help accomplish, and again, I'm a team player. My concerns really are just how it looks. How does it look when you have a Rambler right next to a 2-story that's just a big blank wall? There's nothing worse than looking like you're living next to a box. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about homes when they're well done. They have proper elevations, cut up roof lines. So again, I just don't want to see big boxes going up everywhere that just do not look aesthetically pleasing in our community. But I'm all for the goal, if that just means more densification. So I'm not quite sure which way to go about it. Maybe like
Sure,
you said.
we can look a little bit more into the design considerations, and while not having a more prescriptive approach of no windows, we maybe have some more design sort of goals for that wall that's going to sit right next on, and maybe more in the guidelines rather than as a requirement. So we can further look into design of zero lot lines.
Yeah, because even regardless of where in the city you do it, I mean, you'd still want to have, I mean, the trellis in the picture was kind of weak, sitting against that big wall. So again, I think we can come up with something where everybody wins and gets what they want. All right, does anyone else have any comments on the zero lot line portion of Minnie's presentation? Any comments at all for Minnie's entire presentation?
Thank you. It was great to have further information, to be able to dive in. So we appreciate the time that you took to be able to bring it back to us with kid clubs.
Thank you for your time.
All right, well, that is the last of our business. We are going to move on now to reports. I believe I'm looking at you, Stephen. All right, so we're looking for any city council updates.
Thank you, Chair Voice. So for council, next week, council committee is going to be taking a look at the future updates list, formerly known as the whiteboard for Title 18, and they'll be talking with staff of how to approach the future updates for Title 18, and then they'll also be taking a look at the zoning and development standards, so all the topics that you looked at tonight for bucket 5, they'll also be discussing on August 4th. That's it for council update.
And then will we get to hear and have a meeting to discuss formally the whiteboard, often called a garage, now called, I'm sorry, future development projects? Is that what?
Future updates list.
Updates.
Yes.
How does that work into
That
our
was
calendar?
actually just going to, if Chair Voice, if you want me to shift to announcements, I was just going to start to talk about that.
Yeah, we're moving on to. See, it used to be the computer, now it's the microphone button. Yes, we're ready for other businesses announcements.
Okay, so we've updated the calendar. We've had to shift things a little bit for Title 18 in terms of being able to incorporate a little more time for testing of the code. And then part of that is going to be allowing PPC to have a discussion to look at the future updates lists, I believe in August. And the other announcement I have is tonight is Vice Chair Monahan's last meeting. I want to thank Vice Chair Monahan for all the work that he's done for the commission. It's really been a pleasure. I know I've only been part of the commission for a short while, but I've been in the background listening and watching and seeing a lot of the activity of this commission, and it's been great seeing a lot of the contribution he's been able to put into a lot of the work the commission's done. Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And yeah, I'm really sorry to announce tonight's my last PPC meeting. There's some big changes in my professional and personal life, and I have to move to the East Coast. So I've truly enjoyed my time on the commission. First, a huge thank you to the staff. I'm just constantly amazed at all the hard work and dedication you put into each and every presentation. Really makes us look good because of all of your preparation and your thoughtful, your thoughts that go into everything. And also a huge thank you for your patience, particularly as it applies to obnoxious legal questions. And then to my fellow commissioners, thank you so much for your dedication, passion, and good humor. The city is so much better because of your dedication. I will truly miss spending a part of my week with you all. So thank you all, and I'll miss you guys.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Monahan. Definitely the feeling is mutual. Appreciated getting to know you for the last couple years. Yeah, bummed we're losing a good one. The East Coast is gaining what we're losing. So do wish you well in your future endeavors and your move, and as far as your professional and personal life, I hope it continues just to continue to get better and better for you. Any other comments as far as Matt?
Yeah, you've been a wonderful part of our work. We're so grateful to have had the time that we've had with you, and best wishes on exciting stuff.
Thank you.
We look forward to you getting even better and coming back to the West Coast. Best Coast.
And they weren't obnoxious legal questions. I learned a lot, actually, from my time with Vice Chair Monahan. Like I said, I always found it very interesting, and as our legal eagle, he provided us with a lot of inside baseball that always helped our commission look at things from a different perspective. So, again, best of luck to you in the future. We are ready to close for this evening, so anybody have any further announcements, whether it's from staff? I see many motioning me.
Oh, I was just going to say my thanks to Commissioner Monahan. You know, in my 1 year, I've been impressed with everyone's thoughtfulness, the amount of time you put in, but your legal questions kept us in line, kept the commission in line from veering off on tangents. So you'll be missed, but good luck to you.
Yes, Matt definitely kept us all honest, no doubt about that. Does anyone else have any further comments, anything to bring up for the good of the order? Well, I just want to personally say how excited I am to be back into chambers with staff, with part of our Planning Policy Commission. I know we'll see the other part here shortly, but I've been waiting for this day for 28 months, a long time, and I cannot tell you how happy I am to be here with all of you, and looking forward to our next meeting. I believe it's August 7th? August 11th. I guess I'll be here by myself on August 7th. August 11th we'll be here, and I believe that's also a joint meeting as well. No. All right, I got all my facts, so it is time to go. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and tonight we will adjourn the meeting at 8:07 p.m. Thank you.